Kehlani has just released Folded and I'm here for it. This track takes me back to classic R&B of the olden days, Usher Confessions, 2000s Mariah, but also with a modern sensibility, K1, Giveon, Bryson Tiller. I'm going to show you how you can make what I call real R&B, and by real R&B I mean you're going to be using sounds that real musicians would play, and I've got a game-changing technique for you today, and I don't say that lightly. It's a beautiful sound. Listen to these strings and you're going to learn how to do it today. No gatekeeping here. We're going to deconstruct Folded and build it from the ground up. You're going to get an insight into an industry producer's mindset, and then we're going to build our own track in the style of, with tons of techniques and tips. Hang around to the very end today, you will not be disappointed, I promise. So these are the actual drums from Folded, but let's use our own, it's more fun that way, right? Get your ear used to C sharp major and 136 BPM. The main progression is a 4-3-2 progression with some variation we're going to get into. Now I've listed the producers up on screen now, and I'm not sure who did what, but I'm going to show you how they took these chords from just blocks of MIDI to kind of elevate them to something that a keyboard player would actually play. The whole thing about this track is it feels really live, like real musicians are playing it. So you use common tones in the chords, use leading notes to join the chords together to make a melody out of lifeless blocks of MIDI, like what you're hearing now. Of course it is easier to play this, but you can reverse engineer it and learn how to do it that way. Try muting out notes, trying inversions, all those kind of things. And then this chord comes in the piano, this like B flat minor triad. It's quite ominous, right? It's like telling a story, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. And all these techniques and tricks mount up and help you to create better, richer and fuller productions, especially when you're making this kind of R&B. And remember, there is a game-changing technique that I'm going to show you in a bit, but you know, we've got some important things to learn first before we get there. And these chords are crying out for a bass line to just glue them together. There's some subtle variation that I want to point out here where the bass is going to change the chord quality. Listen to this. Coming up right now. There you go. Playing a B flat instead of the F there, which kind of makes it into a 5 chord going to that 2, the E flat, and breaks expectations and monotony of just having that F every single time. This is all food for thought, and if you're intrigued, hit me up on IG for a one-to-one. You will get so much value, I promise. Now, the game-changing technique. There's one sound or one motif in this track that is repeated and repeated with slight variation that I feel really, really is a signature. And this is why it reminds me so much of Usher's Confessions. Listen to this line in Usher's Confessions. Let's have some drums back here. Yeah, you just heard the game-changing technique for Motifs. And what was it? Well, I'm going to give you one more example, and it's from Faith Evans. Yeah, it's that signature guitar motif, and it pops up again in Folded, and all it is you go to the 2nd degree of the scale, and the Faith Evans song is in D major, so we go from an E and we hammer on to the 3rd degree of the scale. And we can use rhythm variations or wah-wah and filter options, and you don't have to play guitar to do this. I'll show you later how we're going to do in our track it with a synth. And the great thing about it is that as that stays constant, or you know, with slight variations and the harmonies moving underneath, you get this incredible tension push-pull where that motif just keeps going and going and going, and it just really sticks in the head as a really good earworm. But let's bring it back to Kehlani. 2, 3, 4. So obviously I've played everything in here, and it's just an approximation. It's not the exact parts, so don't come for me in the comments. I'm just trying to give you an idea of principles that will work. Using this technique here is really game changing to understand it and then apply it to your own samples and beats as well, because this can really prove a springboard for an artist to be inspired. Hear that motif, it's so catchy, it's so hooky. Just going from that 2 to the 3, and I know some people will be like, oh, it's in a minor key, but I just like to see things in the major key, even if it sounds kind of dark, just because I find it easy to then talk numbers, and numbers can be applied to all keys. That's why I like using them. So now I'm going to deconstruct my tribute to Folded, where we've got all those similar kind of elements that we highlighted in the beginning part of the video, but now we're just going to go a little bit more in depth, and I'm going to talk you through my thought process while creating, maybe some mixing tips, some other goodies along the way, some other things, insight into my thought process and why I did certain things. So these kind of videos take a while to produce, so I'd really appreciate, you know, if you hit like and subscribe and you kept the watch time up by just, even if you don't want to watch it all, just let it play the whole way through. And yeah, that would really help me, and I really appreciate the support so far, guys. I want to zone in first on these drums, and if we look, kept the drums pretty simple, but again, my whole thought process behind making this was kind of go for more live type sounds here. So just programmed this kick and this rim with a little side rim to kind of accent as well, and I chose a hat loop which sounds like real hats instead of like 808 hats. You can see my kick on the top there, rim there, and these side snares, which I pan the side snares a little bit to the left as well. I then added this shaker. Da, 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 da. That was on the left, and then on the right I did another shaker. I also had this cool little fill, but again I chopped it off at the beginning, but it does sort of intro the whole thing like this. And on that fill I just use a phaser. I always like putting movement plugins like phasers or choruses or flanges on my little fills, just give them a bit, you know, a bit more interest. If we go back and make the loop like that, the first thing that I added again was the keys. I didn't add the motif first, but once I put that in, this is all going to make sense. Very simple keys pattern, and just for you guys, I programmed this in C major or A minor, however you want to look at it. I kept to, again, putting my bass note of the keys in the bottom there, and then an octave up, making my chords. So I started again doing this like 2, 3, 4 progression. So, and I kind of like this G on top, and then I just made a little melody on the end. I stuck another chord in here, a passing chord, a C sharp diminished chord, which again, the rule of thumb is that before any minor chord in a diatonic scale, you can go half a step underneath and create a diminished chord. A diminished chord is just made by stacking minor thirds on top of each other. They're symmetrical chords, as you can see here. This is a C sharp diminished, and yeah, just stuck this little melody on top, which was, you know, pretty easy to do. And then the second time the progression comes around, I leaned into exactly what we hear on Folded, which is this like 5 chord before the F, before we get to that 2. So obviously the 5 chord of F is some kind of C dominant chord, and all I've done is I've done one of my favorite chords. I spoke about these before. It's like a slash chord, and so I put a C in the bass, and I then put a sharp or B flat triad, major triad here to create like a C11 chord. Gives you somewhere really interesting to go harmonically there, kind of similar to what's going on in the Folded tune, but again a little bit different as well. And then the second time the whole phrase comes round, I added that on top. Same here. And then and what's going on at the end here, I am using a 5 chord of the D, which is again, once the cycle comes around, that's going to be our target chord again, and I'm just playing an altered dominant chord. Think of an A major chord, add the dominant 7th, and then add a 9th, flatten or sharpen that 9th. I actually spoke about altered dominant chords in one of my other videos. If you want to check that out, hit me up, and I got you on that. And what I knew from this was that this was going to give me some real space to kind of work a bass line around, and I could really move on that bass around these chords super nicely. When that bass comes in, I'll show you exactly what I did. Onto the motif, which I went for the sky keys. Now, I'm kind of simulating what was going on those guitars on those other tracks that we heard, the Faith Evans, the Confessions, and obviously Folded. I use this rare acoustic guitar, and if I play it on its own, right, You can hear me bouncing between that 2 and the 3 of the chord. So you've got that D and that E, which are obviously the 2 and the second and third degree of C major. So I've made a motif. Listen to that now under the chord. Ooh. Instant 2000s R&B. It just works so nicely, right? Almost anything you put around that is just going to sound beautiful. And what I went for next was a bass, and I used some of those techniques that I illustrated in the first part of the video. So some root notes, again when we landed on that C second time around here, it's going to really highlight that break in expectation where you think you're going to that 3 chord, that E minor chord, but really we're going to that like sort of C dominant chord, C sus chord really. Let's have a little listen to it with the bass line, and again you can see I've done some fills. I'm thinking like a real bass player. They're mainly just A minor fills, and as I've always said before, sing your bass line fills out. You can approach notes from a tone away, from a semitone away. You can chromatically walk up to notes, and if you want more bass source, I know I said I'm going to do a designated bass video, and that is in the works. And guys, go cop a free mini kit. The link is in the description if you haven't already. And yeah, hit me up. I'd love to hear what you're working on. Things I really like to do is, like, I could have made this note really long, but I've just kind of changed it up so you've got some long notes, some short notes. I'm really trying to play this like naturally how a bass player would play it, and I'm on the Scarby Rickenbacker bass on the Double Date PM. And what I've also done here is I'm using a multi-band compressor to just duck a little bit of like low mids. So every time this passes the threshold, it's going to take a little bit of energy out of that bass, which really helps to kind of tame that woo you sometimes get with the bass. And that's kind of I'm going to touch more on that on a mixing video that I'm also working on, so stay tuned for that. Make sure you like and subscribed. I added a lead in on the second time that this progression comes around. Counter melody, that's all I'm thinking here. A lot of notes repeating, simple, as I say. Nursery rhyme melodies always work well. Again, you've got to have this wah guitar. Shout out to people like Isaiah Falls, who brought back these kind of wah guitar, and there's one, as we heard, in Folded as well. You know, being a guitarist first, I always love when guitars are kind of brought out. Love that. And it's not as good as a real wah-wah pedal, but you know, I got this preset here and I just sort of tweaked it about a little bit and it does the job. My wah-wah is actually still out of action, so I need to get that fixed. Now, there's not much left here really, just some strings, and I just wanted to kind of, you know, flex my harmonic muscles on the strings. But really, all I'm thinking when I'm putting strings in is I took my MIDI information from my piano, from my EP, and just move the notes around. I tend to like kind of close voices on strings. I think of strings kind of like pads really. If I just zone in on these strings now. Scissor-esque kind of strings here. They sound a bit MIDI on their own, but in the mix I think they sound pretty good. And again, there's no processing on them whatsoever right now. It's all about these voicings. So again, if you need some help with your voicings, hit me up and I'll see what I can do for you. But just think about, as I said, getting notes close together. Think about a top line melody. I was thinking da, da, do, da, I'm always singing like simple melodies that are gonna interact well with the other parts that you've got. A little bit of trial and error, a little bit just seeing what works. And to contrast those string lines, I added some pit strings, which is just like little plucks, and you can hear them here. Beep ba 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 ba. And all together. Just works so nicely. And we hit that kind of C sus chord. Perfect for an artist to flow over, you know. I flexed a bit more on these strings here, but we're just going to go up and up and up, crescendo, right? Thinking about moments here, thinking about emotion. And again, yeah, love that. So guys, I hope you got something out of this today. Hit me up on IG, as I said before, and check out the video in the top corner for some more source. Peace.